Hello, and welcome to our Summer Scares Young Adult panel. I'm Yaika Sabat, the manager of reader services at NoveList. Before we begin, I'd like to go over some technical details. Links to Summer Scares resources and information were included in that reminder email you received from Zoom 1 hour ago. To download them, please open that email, scroll to the bottom, and click on the link located there. You can also download the title list by copying the URL on this screen into your web browser. If you have any trouble, please contact us at webinars@booklistonline.com. The audience is in listen-only mode, but we welcome any questions you may have. On the bottom of your screen is a toolbar with a section for Q&A. If you have a question or need technical assistance, simply click Q&A and type your message into the box that appears. We will do our best to respond to all tech-related questions and will pass along all other questions to today's panelists so they can follow up with you after the webinar. Booklist offers closed captioning on all webinars. To enable or disable captions on your screen, please look for and click the live transcript icon on the toolbar mentioned earlier. From there, you can select Show or Hide Subtitles from the menu that appears. If you choose to enable subtitles, you can adjust the size of the captions at any time by selecting Subtitle Settings. And finally, Booklist expects all participants to maintain an atmosphere of respect and fairness. Anyone who violates this standard of behavior, including engaging in any form of harassment, may, at the discretion of the organizers, be immediately removed. We'd like to start today's program with a brief introduction about the Summer Scares program. For those of you unfamiliar, this is the 6th year we've released a Summer Scares reading list, which includes titles selected by a panel of authors and librarians, and is designed to promote horror as a great reading option for all ages and during any time of the year. The program is designed by the Horror Writers Association, or HWA, in partnership with United for Libraries, Book Riot, NoveList, and Booklist. As I mentioned earlier, we sent a link to the 2024 Summer Scares programming guide, but please feel free to ask for that in the Q&A box if you're unable to locate it. We'd be happy to share it with you. Now, let's get to the reason we're here today, our wonderful panel. Today, we have the pleasure of hearing from Kendare Blake, author of All These Bodies from Quill Tree Books, Sara Farizan, author of Dead Flip from Algonquin Young Readers, and Gretchen McNeil, author of Murder Trending from Freeform. We'll hear a brief presentation from each author about their book and then move to the Q&A portion of the webinar. We'll start with Kendare Blake, author of All These Bodies. Kendare, could you tell us a little bit about your book?
Sure. All These Bodies is the story of a young woman and a young man who get caught up in an investigation of a very strange series of murders. Before the cover goes away, I just want to point out one of my favorite things about the cover is if you look close at the dress, you can see like handprints on her, which I love because like, are those handprints like marks left over from something that was done to her, or are those like victim prints trying to get out? Who's to say? So the book takes place in the Midwest in the year 1958, and there's been a string of really grisly killings. People have been found with their throats cut, with their wrists slashed. A few of them have been found with their thighs cut really deeply down to that artery. They're found in their cars, in their homes, in fields. They're old, they're young. There's no connection, seemingly, between the victims, except for the fact that there's absolutely no blood found anywhere at the crime scenes. Until the Carlson family is brutally slaughtered in their Midwestern farmhouse, and a young girl is found at the scene completely covered, like Carrie covered, head to toe, just splashed with blood. And when the authorities pick her up, initially they think that she is a survivor until they clean her up and realize that none of the blood is hers. And unfortunately for them, the only person she will talk to is the sheriff's son, Michael Jensen. The murders in the book and the entire book itself was based on two real-life crimes. The 1959 murders of the Clutter in the Clutter family in Holcomb, Kansas, which was famously profiled by Truman Capote in Cold Blood, and the 11-victim murder spree carried out by teenage serial killer Charlie Starkweather and his 13-year-old girlfriend, Carol Ann Fugate, as they just rampaged through the Midwest. And I guess it was also inspired a little bit by the vampire hysteria of New England, because, you know, maybe vampires? I don't know. So that's all these bodies.
Thank you so much, Kendare. We'll now hear from Sara Farizan, author of Dead Flip. And thank you for joining us, Sara. Please tell us a little bit about Dead Flip.
Sure, thank you for having me, and I'm honored to be in this group. So a reason I wrote Dead Flip is I think I was in a phase of my career where I wanted to have more fun. I think I had written books that had humor in them, but were dealing with sort of personal identity issues and things that were in different genres, whether it was romance or sports, but things to do with that I found sort of that I needed to get off my chest. And I wanted to kind of go back to the stuff I loved as a kid. And horror has always been one of those things that I have loved, but I'm afraid of everything, which does not bode well for wanting to write horror because I'm easily startled. I'm just a big fraidy cat. But a lot of the media, I love Halloween. It's my favorite holiday. A lot of the media I loved as a kid. I wanted to pay homage to in a story. I wanted that feeling of what those things did for me when I was younger. So a lot of those things were in the 80s and 90s. So I love Gremlins. I love Ghostbusters. I love Erie, Indiana, which was a short-lived show. I love Goosebumps. I love Are You Afraid of the Dark? And I loved video games and all 90s 80s, kind of too much so. Like my editor told me to get rid of a lot of pop culture because the kids won't care. And there's still a lot in Dead Flip, but hopefully it's enough that the kids are like, oh, this is fine. But Dead Flip is the story. It starts in 1992. Well, actually, I should start it from, it goes flashbacks in multiple points of view from the three main characters. So Corey, Maziar, who goes by Maz for short, and Sam. And Corey, Maz, and Sam were best friends in childhood. But when they reach age 12, 11, you can kind of see cracks in their friendship in 1987. So they like a lot of the same stuff. They love the Monster Squad like I did. They love, hanging out. But you can tell that their friendship isn't as strong as it once was. And they go trick-or-treating Halloween night, and Sam goes missing. And he is, these two then 5 years later are estranged. They're not talking to each other anymore. They're seniors in different high schools. And that's when Sam comes back in 1992. And he's still the same age he was when he went missing. So he was 12. So these two have to reconnect, even though they have different stuff going on. Corey is a closeted homecoming queen nominee who has a crush on her best friend or a friend, Janet. Maziar is kind of he has parties too much. He has a drinking problem. He's a jock. And now they have to reconnect with Sam, who has been trapped in a nefarious possessed pinball machine for 5 years. So they have to uncover that mystery. What's going on with this pinball machine? Who's behind it? How can they get Sam back to them? And do they want Sam back? Because he's kind of weird now. He's not quite the same. So think like Village of the Damned kind of situation. So it's fun, it's spooky, and it's really about literally outgrowing a friendship and how scary that can be, but with supernatural elements. So I hope you give it a try. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sara. We'll now hear from Gretchen McNeil, who is here to tell us about murder trending. Take it away, Gretchen.
Thank you so much. All right, so before I pitch the book, I have to tell you, it came out in 2018, and that year is important when I start talking about the plot. So imagine a world where a reality TV star is elected president of the United States. And he sells the criminal justice system to a Hollywood reality TV producer. And together they turn San Francisco's Treasure Island into Alcatraz 2.0, a prison island where people who are convicted of capital crimes are sent. They live in little apartments. They work jobs on a fake main street. They go about their lives, however long they may be. And eventually, they are hunted down by one of 12 thematic serial killers, and their deaths are streamed live on an app for your phone or tablet. And it's a comedy, sort of. It's about a girl named Dee who is falsely convicted of killing her stepsister, sent to Alcatraz 2.0. And she wakes up dressed as Disney Princess Cinderella in a maze, being hunted down by a serial killing facsimile of Prince Charming holding a 10-inch cake knife. And she does what she's not supposed to do, which is fight back, and accidentally kills the serial killer, which sets off a series of events that may or may not lead to the downfall of Alcatraz 2.0. I sold this book on Halloween 2016. And a week later, we had an election in this country, and I had no idea that I would be writing a book that had so much to do with the next few years of all of our lives. It is a dark comedy. It has also a lot of pop culture references, Sarah. This one has a serial killer named Cecil B. DeViolent who recreates films when he kills people. We have scenes from Zoolander recreated in this film, from Die Hard, from The Shining. There's a couple of creepy twins running around in a set that looks very much like the Overlook Hotel. I had way too much fun doing this. There's also a lot of Disney princess references, and I did a book for this book is for Disney Hyperion, so they let me get away with some of it. I think the horror and the comedy make the political satire go down a little bit more easily. But I also got some of my rage out as a woman dealing with the fallout of the 2016 election. And so that is it. I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Gretchen. We are now going to move on to the panel portion of our webinar. So, we can just get to chatting. And the first question I want to ask is a little bit about how did you all get into writing, and if you have a favorite part of your writing process?
Is being done with the book a favorite part of the writing process?
Absolutely, yes. Checking it off your list.
Mine.
There you go.
I
think go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. Yeah, writing, especially professionally, it's a gift, and we're so fortunate to be able to do it. But I do worry sometimes it takes a lot of the joy out from when you weren't doing it professionally. So you have to find ways to get back to the joy and why you love it. For me personally, I've always really liked finding the voice of a character or dialogue. And that's always been true from when I started writing. But I think I started writing in earnest in like middle school. And that was mostly for fun, and also like it was something I felt I could do. Like it was like plays and skits and things like that. So but I writing for young people, I sort of I do enjoy it because I think there's something more hopeful about it, and there's something that's more, even though times change and I feel very we don't know what kids are talking about a lot of the time, slang wise. Some young person said, yeah, it's nerfed out, and I was like, I'm sorry. And by context, I got that it meant old, but I was like, Nerf, like the sword or the football, or like, do they still make that? So that's not old. So anyway, so I'm just saying that even as time marches on, and I don't know what today's kids are completely dealing with. They have a lot more stuff, I think, than we did growing up. But those things that are universal remain, and those things that are, things you struggle with or things that you're unsure about. I think having a story that can be fun or scary or whatever and still have a little hope and a little is always good. But my favorite part is characterization, and I'm really bad at setting and description.
I'd probably argue that you're not bad at description,
I'm
personally.
pretty bad at it. The book is edited.
Oh,
So there's an
valid.
editor that's like, how about, letting us know what's happening here? What do things look like? Yeah.
I just want to mention, ever since you described your book, Sarah, I've been thinking about how much PTSD I would have if someone trapped me in a pinball machine. Like, that is the worst friggin' machine to possibly be caught in. I have like the dinging is in my head right now. I'm like, oh my
Over
God.
and over again. Yes.
Over
And
and
like
over and over.
a metal
It would
ball
be
rolling
so
towards you at a high
traumatizing.
speed.
Just,
Yeah.
I'd rather be in Jumanji, I'd rather be Robin Williams just sucked through Jumanji than be stuck in a pinball machine. That
It's
is
not repetitive, at least, right?
right.
It's
You have
exciting.
like jungle life. It's variety. But wow,
If it's fair,
awesome.
they're sort of just trapped in there. They're not, having to be bounced around. There's no sense memory of like once you're taken in, you're in stasis.
Yeah. It's like a
Okay.
different
So there's like a
world.
minute. Yeah, there's like,
oh, thank goodness.
yeah, there's a music video by Menudo in which it's not great, but there's the Menudo characters are in a pinball machine. It's not like that. They're just sort of trapped and frozen in time kind of thing.
Really want to find that music video. That sounds fun for Ricky Martin.
I'll put it in the chat.
I've seen it as a child. Yeah.
Actually, the first thing that to answer the question, now that I went totally off topic, sorry about that. One of the first things that I ever wrote was a collection of short horror stories with like one of my first boyfriends in like high school, like freshman year of high school. Like I would write one and then he would write one and we'd like share it at lunch. And it was they were so
romantic.
they were so terrible though. Like some of mine were okay, and his were just the worst. But you're young and you're in love or whatever. And so yeah, we did an entire collection. Like I think he did 10 stories and I did 10 stories. It was a whole thing. And then the relationship was over.
Kendare, was the relationship over because of his writing, or
yeah, you were like,
was it a
I don't
big
know, dude.
gave you ick? Yeah.
I can't read anymore.
He shaved his head.
Mm.
Yep. There we go. That was it for me.
Like I could deal with your bad writing,
but
now that your hair is different, it's too much.
You have to have hair if you're going to be that bad of a writer.
To balance the writing.
I am not like you two. I could not have written anything when I was a teenager. There's no way I could have been that focused. I didn't start writing until I was in my 30s. And I wrote nothing before that. I was a performer all of my life. I was on stage as a kid. I was a voice major at UCLA. I have a master's in music and opera performance. Like I was in the circus after I stopped singing opera professionally, like always a performer. And so the idea of sitting around and doing this solitary thing, which is writing, is terrifying for an extrovert, to be quite honest with you, which is probably why I said my favorite part is being done. I love telling a story. I especially love horror and mysteries because you're crafting moments. So I'm sort of like the magician forcing the card on you. And I love doing that. But the solitary act of sitting down and doing it is a little bit like scratching skin off my body a little bit at a time. I got into writing when I went through a divorce, and I just woke up one day and I'm like, I'm going to write a novel. I'm going to write a rom-com while I'm going through a divorce. That seems perfectly reasonable. And it was a terrible novel. Shocking, right? Shocking that it was terrible. But I got completely addicted to storytelling. I think I'd been storytelling my whole life, just in a different way. And I had been a lifelong reader, thanks to the librarians in my life early on. And when these two things, the storytelling and the reading, sort of came together and I learned how to be a writer, I got better. And here I am.
I do love the variety of origin stories that we have here as authors. It's pretty great. Now, as y'all know, Summer Scares is, all about encouraging horror. It's not just an October thing. It's year round. And I'm curious if you are fans of horror, whether it's writing horror or just enjoying the genre. Sarah, it sounds like you and I have very similar watch lists. Um, what is it that you love about horror? What is it that you enjoy about sort of interacting with it as a genre?
I mean, the best part, I think, as a teen who read, and I'm older than the rest of you all, and so Goosebumps was for the children I babysat for, right? I didn't know we didn't have it. My experience with horror was middle grade gothic from the 70s by authors like John Bellairs and adult, right?
Yeah.
Adult horror. And so what I loved from age 11 on probably was the sort of titillation of experiencing something terrifying without actually having to experience something terrifying. And that is, I think, the magic of horror in fiction. I think that's one of the reasons it's a perennial moneymaker in Hollywood, right? Because you get to go and experience this thing without actually having to experience this thing.
Mm-hmm.
I think
Absolutely.
too, there's so many variations on horror, right? So I'm not someone who like I don't gravitate towards like a Saw or a Hostel or something where it's like very gory. I've never seen Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which is like sacrilegious for someone who says they like horror. But I do love like Megan. I love Lost Boys. I love Jennifer's Body. I think these and books, John Bellairs was huge for me when I was a kid. I loved all of his stuff. And also just as a kid too, like, and as you were saying, not just when Halloween comes around, but like summer was a big time where I read and watched a lot of horror movies.
Because you're not in school, right?
Yeah.
You have
And
more
so you want
time.
to like soak it all up. And there were, obviously things that you like cover your eyes or you're like, I don't know if I want to turn the page. But I think that, especially for kids, like knowing you're in control of it, where like when actual scary things happen, you don't have control. There are factors that are horrible that happen, that whether it's weather or violence or what have you. But the idea that like you can face these fears and nothing happens. One of my favorite movies is Matinee. It's from the early 90s. It stars John Goodman, also directed by Joe Dante, who did Gremlins. But he talks about, he's playing like oh my God, what's the guy's name? There was a guy who made these schlock horror B movies. And so John Goodman is playing a version of that, and I'm blanking on his name. And I forget.
Ed Wood or
No, it was like Joan Crawford was in one of his Axe movies. It's gonna bother me for the whole rest of the panel. Anyway, if someone Googles
someone's
it.
gonna put it in the Q&A.
Yes,
guarantee you.
But anyway, he explains that like why he makes these movies is like,
William Castle.
Yes, William Castle. That's exactly.
I knew someone was going to put it in that chat.
Thank you, Gretchen. Yes.
Oh, it wasn't me.
Thank you, librarians. Thank you.
It was.
Thank you, audience.
Sarah White. Thank you, Sarah White.
Thanks, Sarah White. But yeah, so John Goodman is playing a version of him and saying why he enjoys making these movies. And it's like, because then the lights go up and everything's okay. And that movie takes place it's in Miami during the Cuban Missile Crisis. So like the town and all the kids, they're already panicked and scared because of what might happen. And this movie kind of distracts them, and it's like an Ant-Man kind of weird thing, but Mant, that's the name of it. So I also think that horror, when times get tough, which they almost always are, there's always going to be something, but it's something that people gravitate to, and for right reason, especially kids, I think.
Oh yeah.
Because there's a control element.
I mentioned that I started out pretty much writing horror, and I was steeped in horror, like just swimming in horror from a very early age. I moved straight from the Black Stallion novels to like Stephen King's Gerald's Game was the first novel that I read. The one about sex games, just dive right in.
Great start.
Yeah, that's good. Like age 10 or something. That's good. Yeah.
Just, Education. I think I saw Nightmare on Elm Street 4 was the first horror movie I watched by myself at like a much older friend's house, and I was way too young for that. And it was great. It's still my favorite. But when it comes to writing horror, as I grew, there was a really long period of time where I was just writing literary fiction. You know, I was doing my master's degree and they really want you to go literary with that stuff. So I was doing a lot of literary fiction. But when I finished that and I went back home and started to think about what I wanted to write next, it's like, you know what I really miss? Vivisecting people. Like I really want to write some entrails in glorious detail. So that's why I wrote Anna Dressed in Blood, which would go on to be my first published novel. But I love horror. I'm a big, I don't like you, Sarah, I'm not huge into like what they call torture porn.
Torture
I'm
porn.
not
Yeah.
a huge fan of like Eli Roth movies. I didn't care for Hostel. I like Saw, but because that has a plot.
Yeah, the first
Yeah,
one
the
actually
first Saw
does have like
is very clever.
It's one of the greatest twists in film history, regardless of genre. It's an
Mhm.
amazing moment at the end of that film.
Yeah, and it's so well done. It's well acted. It's well scripted. I mean, the whole thing is good. My favorite kinds of horror is when horror does serve as like a metaphor. So I love like I really like It Follows. That's a
Oh, it's
good
great. I
Yeah.
love the aesthetic of that one.
Yeah,
So
that's a
good.
yeah, and The
awesome film.
Babadook, you know,
Hmm.
horror as a metaphor for grief, and it also has that fun childhood literary element that I really liked. I wish they made a Babadook pop-up book. I would have bought so
I
many
would
for
have
my
bought that.
friends' kids. Yeah.
Maybe that's your next pitch.
It's
A terrifying pop-up book for children.
Yeah, I mean, y'all touch on so much. I do think I think it's part of why horror is so important to have for kids and teens, is because it does allow them to sort of process these fears and process these anxieties. Like I've always been a very anxious person, and horror gives you that outlet. And it, especially during those times when you're growing up and there's so much changing. I mean, which you see, like I saw as I was reading your books, like the characters in those books are going through so many different things, in unique situations that I think it's sort of a beautiful outlet for younger readers and adults. I mean, I've been a lifelong horror person. I think horror's for everyone, but I think that is one reason that's just so vital to like let kids and let teens explore that. So, and I will say, I one thing I loved about all of your books was the cast of characters. Like, there are the main, maybe one, two main focuses, but even the, side characters are really well defined. You sort of know, like, them, or you feel like you know them. And so I was curious, sort of, what goes into that for you? Like, how do you bring these people to life? Are they based on real people? Like, are there things that sort of inspire them as you're fleshing them out?
I mean, sometimes people are, I think all of the characters have something about me in them, even if we don't look alike or we're not. There's, they're coming from you, so they have aspects of you in them. Sometimes people are amalgamations of a bunch of people you know or met, but also because this was such a 80s, 90s kind of throwback, it's playing with a lot of those tropes and those kind of people that you might have seen. So like Corey to me was very much, she was sort of like not Angela from My So-Called Life, but Angela's like former best friend.
Yes. Who's like popular.
Yeah, or like a
Yeah.
Jennifer Love Hewitt or like a Kelly Martin,
Or
like
Carrie
that
Green in
kind
the
of,
Goonies, kind of
yeah, or
a
Carrie Green and Goonies kind of, I forget her name, Matt, but she was in Twin Peaks as a waitress, and she was in Stephen
Oh,
King's
she's
movie.
Shelley in Twin
Rushton.
Peaks.
Yes,
I
that's
forgot
it.
her real name, but yes,
Yes,
she's
but and she was in Sleepwalkers, which is a
which
wild
is
movie that Stephen King wrote the screenplay.
Mhm.
It's not adapted from one of his not. If anyone hasn't seen Sleepwalkers, don't do it because I don't want to but I mean, I
also
like
do
it in
it
that
because
it's so weird, but just,
bonkers.
you know, there's other stuff to watch but in any case, so, and then Maziar, you know, he's Iranian American, but he was born there and came here in the 80s, which is speaking to a lot of like migration patterns of my community and how the 80s was sort of like a very tumultuous time, but also you're finding a lot of new Americans from different places coming. And also he's sort of like a Ferris Bueller kind of Emilio Estevez in Breakfast Club kind of guy. And then Sam is sort of like Dennis the Menace meets Village of the Damned, meets you know, like Chris Makepeace from Meatballs, the kid in that movie. So they were all sort of like taken from these things that I held dear, but they're not actually based on real people.
Yeah.
Their experience might be like where they went to school or their sexual orientation or, you know, things that I relate to. But like otherwise, they're all just kind of, I just want to make sure they sound real. I think for all of us, it's like, even if they're made up, you just want them to sound like kids.
Yeah.
I have a favorite character in Murder Trending, and his name is Ethan. And
I was
if
gonna say,
you've
is it
read
Ethan?
it,
Because
it's
that's
gotta
my
be Ethan, right? So
my little
Ethan,
baby bird.
I will tell you, and at the risk of spoiling it, killing Ethan off is one of the hardest things I have ever done, ever, because I loved him so much. And he was sort of a reverse engineered character. On the page originally, there wasn't much to him. There's a group of young people that Dee meets on the island, and they sort of realize that they're all kind of good looking and young, and like maybe the ratings of the island haven't been as high. And so some of them have been falsely convicted of doing things in order to get young, attractive people on the island. And Ethan, despite his predicament, has such a great attitude about the whole thing. He was a personal trainer. He's a bro.
Mhm.
He's really, really into action movies of the 80s and 90s and quotes them liberally. And once I kind of figured this out about him, I had so much fun compiling lists of primarily Arnold Schwarzenegger quotes
Yep.
from movies like Commando and Total Recall, and then sprinkling them into this text. And there's a scene where Dee and Ethan have to go rescue two of their friends who were in this Overlook Hotel kind of thing. And he's like, hold on. And he runs back into his apartment, and he comes back fully dressed as Arnold Schwarzenegger from the third act of Commando, like the black like the full like camo and like, and I don't know where he got
I
these clothes, and he's just
lost it
so
at that point,
excited.
by the way.
Yes.
I was
And
like,
it was the point in the book where I was like, either we're going full satire or I have to completely pull it back. And Ethan, I think, as a character, because he was fun and because he brought a lot of humor to the story, allowed me to really dial the satire up to 11, to make another dated reference. So that when we get to later parts of the story, there's a whole gauntlet of serial killers that Dee has to run through at the end, and they just get more and more outlandish. And I think it was Ethan and writing him into this story, this kind of ludicrous action movie quoting dude, that allowed me to just completely go off the rails. And I think part of the magic of this book is that feeling of like, where is this runaway train going? I wrote the book in 9 weeks, which is fast for me and
wow.
probably fast for many writers. But I think it was because of this momentum. And I really credit that momentum with the character of Ethan figuring out the tone for the whole book.
I loved Ethan. Ethan
I
was
know,
just the
everybody
sweetest
does.
bimbo. He just,
I
how can you
know.
not?
He's just
He's
like
just
boom,
great.
boom, boom.
Like a little golden retriever puppy or
I
something. Like, it's great.
know, all paws and Arnold Schwarzenegger references.
Yeah, basically. That was him.
We need an Ethan if he can help you write a book in 9 weeks. Also,
Yeah.
this just randomly popped in. I feel like if Arnold Schwarzenegger was a dog, he would be a golden retriever.
Mhm.
Like that, just like he has like a golden retriever vibe. It would just be heavily accented, like a heavily
Yeah.
accented golden retriever. Um, Wow. 9 weeks. 9 weeks.
It doesn't happen often, but it does happen occasionally.
That is a burn. Like you were scorching the keyboard. That's amazing.
It was all my rage from the time period, what was happening, poured into a book.
Ah, wow. Um, side characters. Side characters.
Right. Sorry.
I love side characters. They're the ones that I don't know, so they can really surprise me. By the time that I start writing my books, I've been hanging out with my main characters for a couple of years in the case of All These Bodies, just kind of getting to know them. But the side characters, they kind of just populate the area naturally as the book goes, they kind of fill in the space. If you look at my longer series, it's kind of plain to see that my side characters have a way of wedging themselves into the main plot, and by the third book, they've surprised our main character themselves now. In All These Bodies, I'm trying to think of one. There was a woman. She's a receptionist at the police station, and she was just, she was a receptionist. That could have been a very much a background gig, just somebody there to be answering phones and moving things in the background. But I noticed that, she had a particular dynamic with one of the deputies, and she was a little bit aloof, but she was very pretty, so she caught the eye. And I don't remember when it was. And she was very sympathetic to this girl who had been found and was now accused of being a serial murderess, where many other people were not sympathetic. They assumed the worst, that she was a little liar and that she was very involved and that why wasn't she talking? But Nancy, I think her name is, I can't remember her name.
Yeah, because it's
Her name is
Nance. I
Nancy.
think Nance. So I think they say Nance several times.
Nancy,
So I believe
yeah.
so.
So Nancy always was very kind to her. And I don't remember when I figured out that what Nancy's backstory was is that she lost her daughter in a house fire. She was asleep. They were asleep by the fire. The fire jumped out of the thing, and she couldn't, she ran out before she realized what was happening, and her little baby. And that happened at a point, I'm like, oh, well, that's why she's so sympathetic to Marie, because her little girl would have been about this age. Um, but it was just one of those things where, that was really surprising. Like, I didn't know Nancy was going to have this sad, tragic, dimension. So, and I love discovering that about side characters. You just never know
Yeah.
where they're going to end up.
I really appreciated that what you did with Nancy because it would have been very easy for her to be sort of like the pretty receptionist who gets her way because she's pretty, but she, I think her personality really and who she is and what she's been through is and there's sympathy, yes, but she's also, she's smart. She's also aware of what she can get away with, aware that she's kind of the boss in that station. So it was really interesting to read. And I was surprised that we did get that little glimpse at her background, but I did appreciate it because I think it did really make her character so much clearer. When I read that, I was very sad too. It's like, oh, I was just like, oh no, Nancy.
I know, I'm like, holy crap.
Like,
I'm
oh,
so sorry, Nancy. I've been treating you.
I had to do it, Nancy. I'm sorry. It just came to me. I know. It was, I know. So Gretchen mentioned, Ethan, sort of like your favorite. Kendare and Sara, are there characters in the books that you either have a favorite or that you really like connected to as you were, writing it?
I think yeah, Sam was such fun to write because he is playful and he wants to bring his friends back to like when they were younger, like so he's regressed in a lot of ways that I am. I think also when I was writing this book, it was sort of speaking to the fact that a lot of my friends were starting families or at least, moving on with like another plateau of life that I still have not quite figured out. I pay taxes and I do all the boring grown-up things, but I've not really quite been able to let go of like childlike things, I think.
Same.
So I think Sam really spoke to a lot of that, and that he could kind of get really spooky and really like he's cute and sweet, but there's this like kind of in the genre of what I call smiling evil that I really enjoy. So that includes dolls like Chucky, or clowns, or children that are a little like,
Evil
they're really
kids.
cute, but then they whisper something weird and you're like, okay. Like that kind of thing that I really find the most terrifying, and that's really fun. And I think too, it was interesting to write, again, like secondary characters, you want to make sure they're three-dimensional, but they don't overshadow the main group. It was also fun to write the villains. I won't say who they are, but hopefully they are unsuspecting. And then yeah, just I really enjoyed also writing Corey's sister Tiffany, who is not great. Her character got pared down a lot in the final version. In the first few drafts, she was really more prominent and really showed herself to be an unpleasant adult. So we're like, we already have too many unpleasant adults, so let's not do that. But she was a lot of fun to write too. And I think with horror and any genre, like the romance is more, or the scares are more, or the comedy is more if you care about the people that you're reading about. If you don't care about them, and that doesn't mean they have to be likable, lovely people, but like there has to be something that draws you in and that you relate in some way and are compelled to want to see what happens.
I mean, even when Sam, his mischief veers into just like a little more than mischief, like you still care for him,
Yeah,
you're that's a
sympathetic.
kid. You're still sympathetic with him. It's not, it's not cut and dry.
And he had this, terrible thing that happened to him. And even before the terrible thing happens, a lot of what is dividing the kids is not just like their emotional maturity, which that's a big part of it. It's also their socioeconomic situation. So they started off like more of a level playing field when they were younger, and now it's becoming more clear that that's not going to be the case, and life is going to take them in different directions. So I think that was it too, is like building all that stuff. So you would see why this kid, when he's back from the pinball machine and has had the terrible thing happen, is more like, you can tell why he's upset.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
I really connected with my narrator, who is Michael. He's a 17-year-old young man who wants to grow up to be a journalist. And I have to say, I found him one of the most well-behaved narrators to work with. That kid was, bless him, he's just a good kid, very rule followy, like I didn't have, he didn't put up a fuss once. So always fun to work with a narrator like that.
Yeah, he was just a good Midwestern boy. Like
Right.
he was really
corn-fed Minnesota boy.
Yes, very much. And I am the Midwest, I would say. Each of your stories has very unique setting. You've got, 1958, small town Minnesota. You've got late 80s, early 90s, Massachusetts. And then, of course, I guess contemporary.
We'll call it near future.
Near
5 years in the future.
Yeah, San Francisco, Alcatraz. Was there something specific that inspired you to write those settings? And, I'm guessing at least some of them required some like pretty deep research. So do you want to talk a little bit about the settings of your books?
Kendare, yours must have been the most like research heavy, right?
You would think, but I actually grew up in a small town in Minnesota, and small town Minnesota in 1958, small town Minnesota now, not so different.
Oh gosh.
So it didn't, like I'm like, I know this place. I've got this place. So it wasn't so bad, but it was a natural decision to set the book in 1958 because all of the murders that inspired the book took place in 1958 and 1959. Kind of strangely, I'm like, what a terrible year for the
like
Midwest.
The 70s. There's just these time periods where
ridiculous. But yeah, it was a lot of fun doing research into the actual murders. I got to read a lot of murder books and that I did get some things wrong though. Yeah.
Mm.
When my dad read the book, he's like, honey, we did not have pop top beer cans. I'm like,
Oh,
thanks, Dad. Sorry about that. Yeah.
the good news is most of your teen readers won't know that.
Yeah, you're covered there.
Like you, I picked a place that I was familiar with. San Francisco is my hometown. Um, when I was sussing this out as a prison island, of course, the most, famous American prison island is Alcatraz, which I grew up, staring at. And but there's this other island in San Francisco that most people don't know about called Treasure Island. And it's a man-made island attached to this little rocky spit of land where the Bay Bridge anchors the two spans, right? So if you've ever driven across the Bay Bridge from downtown San Francisco to Alameda and Oakland, you have gone through a tunnel on Treasure Island. And it was used as a decommissioning area for ships that did the nuclear tests, like in the South Pacific. So most of the area is now contaminated, but they built a bunch of apartments on it in the 60s and 70s. And when I was home from grad school, I went to a party there with friends. And I was like, what? Because when I was a kid, you couldn't get off the island unless it was all military. So some point in the 90s with the housing crisis, they opened it up. And I just remember driving around this place and there was like a gas station, a school that hadn't been used since like World War II, some like warehouses where they were shooting porn and like a brewery. Like it was the most, and then these people living in these ugly
in the middle of it all.
1960s apartments. And it just sort of stuck with me how surreal. And then you look across the water at the sparkling lights of downtown San Francisco. And it just, the dichotomy of that, of being so close. When you read accounts of Alcatraz, the prisoners will say you could hear people like laughing and partying when the wind blew the sounds from the city. And I was like, that mix of the horror that was happening there and life just going on felt like a perfect setting. I mean, you don't get any sort of San Francisco vibes out of this. It's just a prison island, but
yeah,
it was the first setting that came to mind for me.
I lived in San Francisco and then the Bay Area as a kid for a chunk of it. And I was reading your book and I was like, oh yeah, there were all those times I sort of just passed. You sort of just see
you just like,
and I'm like, yeah, like it's not far at all. So it's like that was a very like chilling passage thinking of that. Like the world's just right there.
Mm-hmm.
For me, the kids live in a made up town in Massachusetts, but it's the greater Boston area where I live. And I've done better about being more present in the past 2 years, I think, but there still is a huge chunk of my hobbies that are very retro, and that are very like I would just watch like 80s and 90s commercials that I would see as a kid, but just like as ASMR, like I would just have it in the background or like, that kind of thing. I'm not doing that less now. I sort of made a resolution about being more present. So it's mostly just like I look up basketball and stuff. But I think it was speaking a lot to, nostalgia, right? It's fun. It can be really like a soothing kind of balm, but it's an escapist, but it's also like, it can take you away from your life in some ways. And I think it can also be like when you make things rosy, it's like it wasn't all that rosy. And like when people say the good old days, it's like, well, who are they good for? Like there's a very different, I know it's like thinking back on our youth and things we enjoyed then, and you can still enjoy those things now. There's nothing wrong with it. But like when I know there's a reboot of something like a Ghostbusters and the new one comes out tomorrow, like I'm excited and I'll go see it, but I know it's not for me. Like, I'm not going to be like, they didn't do the thing from the, like, let the kids of today enjoy it. Right. So, I think the book spoke a lot to that. And I already had all this research from just hobbies and things I enjoy. And then when I was a kid, there was a Bob's newsstand, not Rob's like in the book. And the Bob in real life, he passed many, many years ago. But it was just this great place where I got my Archie comics. They were my first comics.
Oh, I loved
And there was
yeah.
a slush puppy machine. And I was maybe like 5 when I started going there, and it was Fridays. Mom would take me, and I was like, this place is the greatest. You could buy cereal, but you could also buy like pipe tobacco. Like it was just that kind of, it was sort of like the store Needful Things without the like possessed antiques, And they would call me Queen of the Archies when I walked in there, and I watched a lot of movies. So I'd say things like, keep the change. And then I would wait for change, and they'd be like, not giving it to me because I didn't quite get that, like, I told them to keep the change. So a lot of it's a very made up town based on memories I've had, and also all these things that I've talked about before. But there's nothing more magical than like New England in October, I think.
Yeah, agreed. I have probably, I don't know, 10 more questions I could ask y'all, but probably have time for one more. And I'm curious if there's any like authors or books that you've loved recently that you'd love to, recommend to others, or if you have your own upcoming work, that you want to give a shout out to, that works too.
Well, I've been reading a ton of female driven horror recently, both in the YA and adult space. Recent ones I loved are She is a Haunting by Trang Phan Tran, and The Haunting of Velkwood by Gwendolyn Kist. That is adult, but also YA, in that a lot of what happens in the story happens when these kids are actually in college, and it's kind of a flashback. Those were fantastic. I also read Elizabeth Hand's officially sanctioned sequel to The Haunting of Hill House called The Haunting on the Hill, which I loved. So that's most of my reading lately. And then I do have a book that just came out in March, earlier this month, called Four Letter Word, which is the third of my sort of Hitchcock revisited YA novels. This one is an homage to Shadow of a Doubt, which is actually one of my favorite Hitchcock. It's the
Really
only
good
one with a
Hitchcock.
teen protagonist. And it's about a girl in Eureka, California, which is way up north, everybody, in the redwoods, whose family is hosting an Italian exchange student, a hot Italian exchange student named Alberto. And she's the only one who suspects that he's neither Italian nor a student, but he might actually be a notorious serial killer on the run.
Well, there's a lot. There is a comic book series that I loved called Strays, which is a horror for adults, but like the dogs are like Disney-fied dogs. It's by Tony Fleeks and Trish Forstner, I believe. And Strays was like these group of stray dogs that are, at this one house, and they know when it's snack time, and they slowly figure out, like, because dog memory is different from human memory, that the reason they're all in this house is because the serial killer who killed their owners then procured them, and so they belonged to the serial killer's victims. So those creators have a new comic book series coming out with cats.
Yeah, Feral.
And I'm blanking on the title, but
It's Feral. It's called Feral.
Feral, yes.
Because I've already told my comic book store to
Yes.
subscribe me.
So I'm very excited for that. I really enjoy Paul Tremblay's work, and he's become a friend. So we mostly talk about Celtics and not scary things. And then I always love Maggie Takuta Hall's Squad, which was a summer scare book last summer. And I'm in a short story anthology that came out last October. It's called Night of the Living Queers. It's YA. I know there's a lot of book banning, so if you're unable, but if you'd like to check it out, they're horror short stories that are by queer authors. And mine is about a haunted drive-in movie theater. And yeah, there's a lot of stuff. But anyway, those are a few.
A lot of good recommendation. I didn't know about the Elizabeth Hand thing, and now I'm very excited to check out Strays and Feral. That sounds awesome.
Oh.
I've been enjoying a lot of Erin A. Craig's books lately. I think her most horror-y thing is probably Small Favors that came out a couple of years ago. It's kind of monstery in the woods, mysterious, kind of wish-granting, almost cult-like in the it feels like Frontiers. It's like Little House on the Prairie, but not. I love everything she writes, but everything else is kind of a little more gothic than horror, I would say. Um, I'm in an anthology that's coming out in July. It's called The White Guy Dies First,
Oh,
and
cool.
it features, I think, a bunch of authors of color and Our Only Rule, Terry Benton Walker, uh, rounded us all up, and the only rule was, pick a horror trope, flip it, and then the white guy has to die first because that's what the book is called. And we're like, cool, fun, great. So I've read some of the stories now. I just got my arc of it, and they're excellent. Highly recommend that one. And I have myself next month the last book in my Buffy the Vampire trilogy. Buffy the Vampire Slayer trilogy is coming out. It's called Against the Darkness. It's available on April 9th, and it is the end of the Buffy the Next Generation series.
Cool.
Well, that, I'm afraid, is all that we have time for today. Thank you so much, Kendare, Sarah, and Gretchen. This was a really fun discussion, really wonderful discussion. And tomorrow, all attendees will receive an email containing links to today's recording and a certificate of completion. For more about Booklist webinars, be sure to visit www.booklistonline.com/webinars, where you can view archives of past webinars and register for upcoming ones. And don't forget to register for our other Summer Scares panel happening Monday, March 25th. That will feature the adult authors for this year's picks. And just thank you for joining us for today's webinar. One more huge thank you to our panelists, Kendare, Sarah, and Gretchen.
And
Honestly,
thanks to you for moderating.
y'all have
Thanks,
been.
Yaika, for doing this, and thank you to everyone who listened, and it was a great time.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having us. This is really fun.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not kidding when I say like we probably talk for another hour, but we did get a time limit, so I guess I guess we'll stop. But I also want to thank everyone who attended. Thank you for coming and helping us celebrate the Summer Scares program.